Men Without Chest. You guys read through it. It's one of my favorite books. It's a very simple book, right? The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis. And it gets later as to why he calls it the abolition of man. It's a book on education, but it also has a lot to do with the fact that nature will eventually be used as a tool of one man over another man. So once we use nature itself as a tool to subjugate others, then that in turn winds up being the abolition of man. That's where the title came from. I put it in here because I'm trying to figure out a way that will work here where we can make a transition from the objective to subjective and yet keep the subjective because it's necessary, and how we're going to tie that into beauty. So we're going to start that today a little bit. The reality is most of us don't know what is beautiful. We figure it's what we like. We also associate most of knowing with reason. So it's in the head, right? That's how we would typically understand it. We might think like inclinations, right? Like the guttural responses. But that might propel us to do something, but we may not think of it as a way of knowing. So we normally put it with the head. We normally put it, instinct with the gut. We're going to try to figure out how does the heart play into this. And could you know with the heart? Can you see with the heart? And can you know with love? Things like that. And does beauty actually teach us anything that's objective? So we're not going to do the sum of the argument today. This is an entire field of philosophy, aesthetics, and also theology. You read some feminist aesthetics in that book, She Who Imagines. So we're just going to try to do our best to work through it a little bit, all right? Now, if I were to ask you, is beauty in the eye of the beholder, you probably would think it is. We're conditioned for that. We don't realize it, but it's kind of a new thing. Anybody here Twilight Zone fans? No? You guys do it? You are? Thank you. Okay, one of the episodes is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And, it has this, sense where they're all disfigured, almost pig-like. And the woman who's trying to always get reconstructive surgeries, who is just absolutely stunning, from our perspectives, is considered ugly by their perspectives. So, the title of that particular episode is Beauty's in the Eye of the Beholder. So we always assume that, well, you think what's beautiful and I think what's beautiful, and we leave it at that. We don't really ask ourselves, does it behold our eyes? How does this beauty work? Now, which I'm hoping you did, if you read through C.S. Lewis, you're going to start to see a little bit about his story. So, he talks about Samuel Coleridge, who was a romantic poet, and it was Wadsworth. And they actually, it was I think it was one of their sisters. She wrote in her journal. So this actual, everything's he puts fictional names in, right? He calls it Gaius and Titius, which literally means like a guy and a fellow, okay? But they actually are, I think it's Alex King and, what is the other fellow's name? Yeah, Alex King and Martin Ketley. So, and he calls it the Green Book, but it is an actual book. The actual book is called The Control of Language, A Critical Approach to Reading and Writing. So in England, this would have been like a high school level textbook that they were using. So these two authors are saying within the textbook that he's talking about this. It's not famous to us, but it must have been a famous story to them. That here these three people are at the waterfall, and they were saying how watching the waterfall is so sublime. And then the authors go to point out he's not really saying anything about the waterfall being sublime. He's sublime. He's only talking about what their feelings are of that, and moves on. Well, that whole thing just sets Lewis off, and you might be thinking, "Holy crap! Relax. This isn't a big deal. You're being rather narrow and pedantic about this." But he's got a point to make. In other words, if you're only saying something about what you feel about that, like the romantic notion, then what are you really saying? In other words, he's trying to say the student, the authors probably didn't know what they were putting across, and the students may not have picked up on it precisely. But if everything about beauty is about taste, at some point you're going to realize that it's only your taste and not mine, then what you're saying is not really important to me. And all of a sudden, we're no longer communicating any particular truth. So he starts out on that level, and he works his way all through it, okay? So he just says it has to be more than a remark simply about a person's feeling. If we say that something is sublime, Again, is it the eye of the beholder? I think it's sublime. Or is it truly sublime? Is there something inherent in this, you know, if you want to call it this essence of what you're viewing, that itself is beautiful and you've discovered it? So can we discover beauty? Or is it simply something that I like this, almost like ice cream, you know, I like butter pecan, maybe you like something else. If we drive everything down to the level of taste, we're going to have a hard time communicating any particular truth as we move through this, all right? Everything will just be a projection, we could say, of our own taste. At this point, you're probably thinking, because of the time when Lewis wrote, you know, in the early to mid 20th century, in the Romantic period, both, you know, Wordsworth and Coleridge were Romantic poets, actually like almost the originators. I don't want to say originators, but they were the first proponents of that in the 18th century. You're probably thinking Lewis is just, you know, going to sit here and bash romantics. How it all can't just be the psychological emotive response that we talked about in the last class. But he equally goes after the people who think they're intellectual, right? Like, well, it all must be in the head. In fact, he even says that's a misnomer. To call them intellectuals is really not true. They might have big heads. I mean, sometimes you probably ran into people like that, right? Especially in academia. You know, they're so important, they're so smart, they can't be nice, they have to look stiff all the time, play the part. They're such, you know, big brains. Why is that the only way we associate how we know things? I mean, why can't there be other ways that we experience the world? You know, you look like even on SATs and IQs charts. You'd be surprised how far up near the top artists are, which is odd, right? Why would somebody with such a high IQ go into that type of field? Why wouldn't they? I mean, you know, why wouldn't they? So nonetheless, and again, just to reiterate, if we're going to drive beauty away from something objective and only make it subjective, then we're never going to be able to say anything important about anything. The minute you say, well, I'm attracted to her, well, she doesn't do anything for me. We think that you know, we think on those terms. We don't know what quite to make of it. Let me say this too. Since this is the book about education, this is a little bit off topic, but because it's part of the text you wrote, you read. He's critiquing education, and what he's critiquing about these people is that he says they're imposing values on these students, unbeknownst to them. And he says that's easy. It's easy for a person. I mean, the fact that a person stands up in front of you like this doesn't make them any better than you. But okay, let's face it. You have a few years of education, you know more. So you really probably could destroy a student's argument. It's not that hard to do. I could have done that in your papers. What would be the point? I mean, what do I go home and say, yeah, show them how stupid they were? You know what I mean? I mean, that all it does is stroke your ego. So he says it's much harder to simply educate the person than it is to impose your values on them. And it's not easy, because it also is letting things sit in an uncertain way. You know, in other words, you guys that went to a parochial high school, maybe you got that impression, like you felt like things were just being imposed on you, right? Even if you might have agreed with someone, it doesn't mean that it was wrong, but it could have been that it's different than trying to pull this out of somebody and give a little leeway. In other words, he goes on, he says very specifically in the book that, you know, what's being pushed upon his education today, and by today he meant the 1940s and 50s. It's the only thing how it's gotten worse. He says you're not really being educated, it's all propaganda. You know, you're just being taught what the next thing is, and you don't have the basis to really critique it. He says what it should be is it shouldn't be propaganda, it should be propagation. You know, almost like you would nurture some sort of plant. Now, he's not a relativist. You know, he's very dogmatic. In other words, he believes that truths have to be passed on. So it's not like, well, we're going to let you discover your truth for you. That's not, you know, if some educational movements think, well, we'll just put everybody in particular groups and let you discover and teach each other. It's not what he's saying. You know, he's saying, look, there are truths that have to be handed on throughout time, but it has to be done in a way of propagation with the student and not in a heavy-handed propaganda. So to find a way to educate these people as they move through the system. And that's not, again, it's not easy. It's a lot easier just to say this is how it is, and then just belittle a person when they try to, you know, come against you and such like that. There was something else there that I wanted to say, and I can't think of what it is right now. Well, we'll leave it at that. Okay. All right. So anyway, he's also not trying to say that these emotions are bad, right? They're very important for us. He's trying to find a middle ground here. You know, like we can't just, you know, have this big cerebral thing, and we just can't go after the gut. There's something else in there between. And we're going to have to figure out exactly how that works, right? So he says there has to be liaison. If we're going to have the cerebral man, the person, like I remember like even going through like graduate school, you'd probably hear it more than them. He's so intelligent, it's hard to understand him. Really? You would think that if a person is that good at what they do, they would make it easy to understand. Isn't that the whole purpose of education? Not to sit up here and sound so abstract that nobody can understand a dang thing you say. Now, granted, there's technical language that gets, you know, brought up. Now, you're not going to have that in the introductory course. If you guys are moving on, you'd probably start to hear language a little more difficult to take in theology and such. But that doesn't mean that you can't. How do you make this relatable to the person, right? So we have to watch this. And we can't just, you know, talk about the visceral. We can't just go with the emotions and the guts all the time. Although these things are both important. He's not getting rid of both of these. But he's like, what regulates these two things? There's got to be something else there that does it. You know, he even says, you know, he goes, those people that call themselves intellectuals, it's a misnomer. They're not that smart. They just seem to be that smart. Because their hearts are so small, so their heads look big, right? Now, think about this. Here's an example. And I'm not sure if it's the one he used or not. But if I were to ask you, like, what do you think about the virtue of honor? What does it mean to be honorable? Like, does anybody, like, what would you say? Like, don't we want to be honorable people? What is it? You should know what you want to be. You know? What do you think? You can throw stuff against the wall, because, I mean, I don't have a strict definition.
Does it have to be integrity?
Yeah, there's integrity. Yeah, there's got to be integrity there. And you're probably not honorable about something easy, right? It usually involves something very difficult. Good shot, I think. Just thought you swatted a fly. So it has to be something difficult. There has to be a level of integrity there. You know, it obviously is going to involve knowing, intellectual knowing. So I mean, it has to be part of that. And the emotions are involved in it. But doesn't it seem like it's something more than an emotion? And it seems like it's something more than something an intellectual enterprise. So we would associate things like, you know, we might use the virtue word of magnanimity, right? This greatness of self. And we associate these things with the heart. And you know we're doing these things almost analogically, right? I learned when I was teaching, when I was in college, I taught 5 South Koreans on how to drive. This was a trip. And I told them if you didn't understand what the questions at that time the state cops gave you all the questions, I said just start talking in Korean until you understand. By the second question, they were all talking Korean. Anyway, we got them through. I got them through, and they got their licenses and everything. So we started talking about this and the feel of the heart. And now I don't know if this is true I can only tell you this is true for the 5 that I was talking with. They invited me over for Chinese New Year, and we were talking about how you feel with the heart. And they said for them and their culture, it's the stomach. You know, that's where those things would reside. So this is a cultural thing here. So we're not trying to overplay this. You know, but in the West, we get it. Intellect's the head, the guts, the instincts. The heart can regulate these things. You know, so you would find things like honor and integrity and magnanimity. These things that we know they're not just intellectual, we know they're not just emotional, but they have to regulate. If you don't have the brain, if we don't have the mind, the brain's an organ. If we don't have the mind regulating our instincts, then we're animals, right? If we don't have the emotion that's going to tie into our brains, then we're just computers. It's like we need something else there. So we're going to talk in terms of this heart. So but you know, we're not going to get out of the subjectivity aspect of this. You know, you might say, well, okay, it doesn't sound like this is so hard to buy into, but how exactly are we going to know simply by doing this? Well, the reality is beauty is known objectively, and it's known subjectively. Doesn't sound right when it's coming out of my mouth, but either way. All right. Let's do this. Since I introduced you to these 2 guys. So David Hume, again, is this empiricist and this skepticist. He says beauty is only in the mind, right? So this is the eye of the beholder. And since we all have our own minds, what you find beautiful and I find beautiful cannot be the same thing. I mean, it might be the same thing, but there's nothing objective there. It's purely subjective. You know, Kant comes along and says, look, aesthetics and beauty, they're not cognitive judgments. So they're going to be entirely subjective. So we all grew up, I mean, I don't know about you, but I always grew up thinking beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And I never associate with anything beyond taste. Even though, you know, if you get into your studies a little bit more, beauty, truth, and goodness are all ways by which we know something, right? I talked to you in the past about this epistemological ladder. We're going to talk about that on Monday. You know, like how beauty can lead us to truth and truth and to goodness, right? But here's what I want you to know. This is new. Isn't it funny that, you know, beauty, it happened with the rationalist and the empiricist. Before this, beauty was thought to be objective. So we've all accepted, at least I have, in the culture, that beauty's in the eye of the beholder, not realizing this is where it started. I just figured it's always been this way, and it only makes sense. But the reality, and I'm just giving you these things as a little bit of a taste. St. Augustine asked, answers and asks a question. He says, look, he says, something might give you delight because it's beautiful. But it's not beautiful simply because it gives you delight. Because delight is a taste. We delight over different things. So we might, and we're not very good with language, right? Like, you know, my wife, when she makes her peanut butter pie for, you know, Thanksgiving, that's beautiful. You know, I'll talk like that. You know, after, you know, 27 years of marriage, my wife nails my mother's lasagna. That's beautiful, right? So we talk like that, but we're talking equivocally. And it's not very good for us because language does form the way we think, right? We do this with love too, right? We talked about that before. You know, we can, you know, love a good grade, you can love your boyfriend, girlfriend, you could love, you know, your parents, you can love God, and we think this is all the same type of thing. But he says, let's be very clear, it's beautiful before we ever get there, all right? And because it's beautiful, we take delight in it. That's objective, all right? Plato, it's a famous definition in the Symposium, he'll call beauty, he'll call beauty the splendor of truth. In other words, sometimes things, you know, just the absolute, you know, clarity of it is found to be beautiful. So somehow, if beauty and truth and goodness, these transcendentals, right, if truth is what beauty is leading us to, then when we find it, it's like we're in rapture over it, right? Now remember the cave. All outside the cave were the real things. Inside the cave were the shadows. So for Plato, beauty actually existed independently in a realm, as did all the other things, as did a chair, as did love, as did clocks. They all existed outside of the cave in the reality, and we only had access to them through the shadows. So for him, beauty was entirely objective. It was extremely real. Aristotle, on the other hand, spoke about this more in terms of like a harmony. Think in terms of like mathematics, right? Or, like, for instance, you can have different tastes in music. Some of you might like rap, some might like classic rock. I mean, just go down the line. But that being said, you know, if I put down like a trumpet concerto, you know, like a Telemann concerto, and played it here, you might not particularly like it. But I think you would find it beautiful. I mean, you would just say that really is something. I don't think I would like listen to it, but I have to admit that is something. And I got to tell you, okay, this will be a little another fiction of fact from Boynton's Almanac, right? So I took a music appreciation class when I was a freshman in college. We had to take an interdisciplinary course. So it was a music class taught by a psychologist. I never understood the whole point, but whatever. You know, actually I'm going to leave part of it out for the sake of it. So I'm a rockhead, Zepp, that kind of thing, right? I go into this course and, you know, they literally had phonographs, and you had to go in the library and study the music. So you had to go in the library, you had to sit in little cubicles, and they had record players with the big headphones, and you sat there and you had to listen and all this stuff. So what our tests were, you know, the professor, would have to stay in the room because somebody had to play, you know, the music. He would drop the needle and play, like, I don't know, 30 seconds. And we'd have to identify, you know, the composer, the era, whatever particular instruments were, you know, being used, the style, and all of that. And then he'd give us, like, you know, 3 minutes, and he'd drop the needle another place. We had to do it again. Well, I got to tell you, I pissed and moaned about that. Stupid, you know, that kind of thing. When you don't like something, it's stupid, right? Stupid, right? I came out of that course and I could never listen to music the same way again. I mean, you know, you don't often have those moments. It totally changed me. Now, I did appreciate some of the classic rock that I listened to, and I still do. But I actually appreciate it for a different thing, right? You know, because I think the one thing I've seen like in music, and we're talking about beauty, so this isn't entirely off topic, is, you know, what's changed with the way that we listen to music is it's become background. You know, the one thing when you had like a record player, you played it and you were there, and you listened to it, and you played the next one and you listened to it. You know, so sometimes people play music all the time, and they might even say, well, I love music. And I often wonder, do you? Because if you really love music, you'd probably be in front of it and not having just surrounding light. I mean, you might like art, but you don't just like, you know, plaster, you know, everything across around you. So I mean, it takes time, but there's usually moments, and I might be wrong on that, that's just my personal opinion. But, you know, nonetheless, that changed me. So I found something objective in what I was listening to that before I really just thought was a matter of taste. It did change me a little bit, I have to tell you. Now, if I make the claim that beauty is objective, then I'm going to line myself with Plato and Augustine and Aristotle and say, you know, human Kant and these other guys and the rationalists, they changed everything. We have to be very careful that it's not entirely objective. There are subjective elements to it. I think what we have to get over is this prejudice that the only way that we think that we can know something truly is through some rational, objective argument. It's not true. There are other ways that we know things, right? Some of you guys wrote in your papers about your love of nature, or perhaps you had religious, not aspirations, but you had affinities that made you feel really close to nature. So when you're in front of something that is extraordinary in nature, how does it make you feel? And not just feel like, you know, in your taste, but how does it affect you as an individual? I mean, it does, like, I think of, like, there was this place where I grew up, we used to go swimming in creeks all the time, upstate. And back in the 70s, when things got cold and frozen, quite often the waterfalls would freeze. It's pretty cool. You can literally ice skate on the creeks, and like where they're, I would say like the pond area up on the waterfall, and you can lean up against the waterfalls. They were frozen solid. Well, you've seen, you know, pictures of like ice-covered, you know, structures and stuff, and something beautiful about it. You don't really know how to put your finger on it, because you're into something sublime there. I mean, words are not really going to communicate exactly what you're thinking here, but nonetheless, you find it beautiful. It could be that there are even moments, like, these are like loving, sublime moments that you really can't define. It could be with somebody that you really care about. It could be this image that catches you on the street, and all of a sudden, you feel overwhelmed. Maybe emotional. I mean, it could be emotional, but it's not just emotional, and you know that, even though if it might express itself that way. You know, in phenomenology, right, that's a philosophy that shows how does this impact on my consciousness. You know, we'd call these like, you know, like, moments of saturations, right? It's almost like the sponge can't hold it all. It's like there's more here than I can take in. And those moments, you know, by the way, are probably the greatest moments in your life. Like, okay, when I teach marriage and prep and stuff, often, you know, sexual questions always come up. And I say, you know, I said, in my experience of teaching this over the last 13 or 14 years, I've learned two things with young people in sex. You overvalue it in the wrong way, and undervalue it in the other way. In other words, you undervalue it thinking that any sexual encounter isn't going to have an impact on who you are as a person. Like somehow it's just things we do. You know, so you can have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sexual encounters before you meet the person that you're actually going to spend time with, and you've acted like nothing's ever going to affect you. That's a really dysfunctional understanding of the human person. I mean, everything affects us, right? And then once a person is married, especially in the early years of marriage, you tend to overvalue and think that somehow this sexual experience is validating the love that we have between two people. And by the time you hit your 30th anniversary, you're going to find it to be the funniest damn thing you ever thought. You know, those are not the moments, you know. So in one way, sex gets overvalued, in another way, it gets undervalued. But at the end of your life, you know, these sublime moments of saturation are going to be the things that you hang on to. You know, they're the things that moved you. And it could be an intellectual thing, too. It's not just that, but it's not just the gut thing, too. There's something else there, right? So what I did was I found a few pictures of things that are beautiful. I don't know how well you can see it, right? But it's just a snowflake. I mean, I'm not lining these up with Aristotle, Plato, and Augustine, right? But you can see the harmony and everything there that Aristotle would speak about. You know, there's something mathematical about that. And it's really cool to look at these things. I mean, not just the symmetry, but it's almost like, and I think it's only like maybe 4 or 5 times magnification and such. I mean, not at this size, but the actual picture that was taken. Now, if we're going to say beauty is not objective, but yet has a subjective element, I would be hard-pressed to find somebody to find it to be ugly. So why is it that we all find it beautiful? Are we just culturally conditioned? I don't know. I don't think so, right? Or how about people, right? I mean, did you ever get, now, if you have an artistic bent, like my wife slaps me all the time. If I'm at the mall or something, I focus on things, and I go into these dead stares because you're trying to absorb these. And that's okay when you're just, you know, looking at a building or something, when you're looking at a particular, you know, individual. It's like creep, you know, that kind of thing. My wife's like, well, you knock it off. You know, you're in public, that kind of thing. This is mesmerizing, I think. She's absolutely gorgeous. So what do you make of it? I mean, is it just because we're conditioned to think so? Or is there something inherent? I mean, is the sublimity in what we are saying about the viewing of this girl's face, or is there something sublime within the girl's face that we have recognized? So we found that we've discovered the beauty there. Because that would be something objective. But if it's just simply my taste, then there's no export. I mean, this cannot go to the next person, right? I mean, but these aren't just a matter of images, right? This isn't an old married couple. That's an 80-year-old man who needed care, and that's his 98-year-old mom who's come back to take care of him. That's a saturated moment, right? And it's not just an emotional moment, although it is that, right? There's more to it than simply just saying that. There's something objective there. So what truths can we get out of that? Well, we probably can get many. I mean, first of all, it's an aspiration. It's not unlike the story I told you about my friend's grandparents who were married 76 years. It's like you say, I want that, right? I want to be married 76 years, and I want to die 2 weeks apart thinking I can't live any other way. But yet, you know, all the decisions that we make up to that point, you know, often thwart that. So, you know, beauty, you know, says something. So human love, you know, obviously is tied into that. So human love could be a way of knowing. Beauty could become a way of knowing. And then what we're going to find out, at least I'm going to try to help you find out on Monday, is that if you're going to attack culture, and if you're going to attack people's way of knowing through beauty, then what you have to do first, you have to disconnect it from any objectivity, and you have to introduce ugliness and give it the name beauty. You have to try to do that, right? Now, as an artist, I don't bash all art, but I also don't like all art. People say, well, if you're an artist, you have to appreciate all kinds of art. Why? Where does that come from? If I was a writer, I have to appreciate all kinds of writing. It doesn't make any sense to me, right? So we can start talking about, like, what is the role of art? There's a lot of different views on that. How does it reflect nature? Is it only supposed to be true and good? You know, I mean, but it's interesting if you study just effects of modern art, it follows cultural and philosophical, you know, drifts. I mean, again, nothing happens out of a vacuum. It's always a reaction to something else. But that's pretty cool, you know. So let me ask you. Now, this is going to be an odd question for you. How important is beauty in your life? Have you ever thought about that? Some of you did a paper in the feminist aesthetics textbook, you know, on the neighborhoods, right? Some neighborhoods that were more beautiful actually led to a more peaceful and stable, you know, community. Some of you, I don't know who it was that did in Philadelphia, you know, how they took the graffiti artists and turned it into, you know, art to help beautify the neighborhood. You know, we often don't think this. You know, we just think that art's, you know, some peripheral thing that doesn't really affect us. Like the one thing me and my wife always wanted to do is we wanted to make plain stuff. I never wanted to make the art that had to fit on a pedestal. I just thought it should, you know, I don't have anything wrong with that, so I'm not trying to make fun of that. I just thought it should fit into your house. You know, it should be something like everyday use, something should be beautiful in everything you do. And it should be simple, just an appreciation, right? That type of thing. But if you really think about it, that'd be a hard question for you to answer. How does beauty fit into your world? And how does it change you? I mean, it's not just fashion and stuff, right? It's not just a matter of shocking people. I mean, I don't think art should just be that. If art moves somebody, fine. I don't think art should just have a shock value. I think at that point, you're just shooting bullets at people. You're not really helping them along. There's got to be something else there. It could make very deep political, religious statements like that, all that, but I think you have to watch how far you go with that. And I'm talking as a professionally trained artist. I've been doing it for almost, how long have I been doing it now? 34 years, So, and I've met a lot of artists over the years. So anyway, how important is it? Let me hold off on that a second. Did you guys ever read Brave New World? Aldous Huxley, did you? Good. I think it's about as fitting for our particular culture as you can imagine. So they've done away with sex connected to procreation because that just led to danger. Right? So, and everything is in slogans. Remember how we talk about slogans? Fit in. Everything is in slogans. So what they want is so the woman no longer has a child. Children are decanted in artificial wombs. And what they've done is, and this is written back in the 40s, and they've done away with the words mom and dad are swear words. Like they have a children's group that go to see the decantery, almost like we go to see a dairy farm or something when you're in elementary school. And the one kid says, well, how did they used to have babies before the decanted? And the lady said, well, man and woman had sex. And then the woman got pregnant, and the one kid, you mean like cattle and animals? Yes. She goes, it was very dangerous, before the war, so this is how we did it. She goes, but that's why, now we're a scientifically enlightened culture, and we no longer have to do those things, and our children are decanted. And one kid says, so they used to have moms and dads, and then she stops and says, there's no need to use that kind of swear language around here. Those words have become offensive because they're no longer connected to anything. I mean, I'm not trying to make a political statement, but we're not that far away from that type of understanding, right? So then they bring so what happens is everything is pleasure-oriented. This is almost Epicurean, right? So I remember last Wednesday, I said how there are some philosophical movements that are not necessarily compatible with Catholicism. Well, Epicurean is one, when you're making pleasure the top of it. So they would take soma, they'd go on what they call soma holidays. Soma means body, right? So they would take soma and they would just go off and float. Almost like it's a drug. But they had to have sex, and you couldn't have sex with the same person. If you had sex with the same person too much, you were a suspect. So that was their slogan. Promiscuity is a citizen's duty. They also said that the whole point, and everybody was broken into alphas and betas and gammas and deltas. So because you were, first of all, you're all engineered. By the way, everything was so mechanical in this world that their god was Ford, and the car manufacturer, because of how he systematized, production, and instead of using terms like AD, on the Domine, it would be whatever the date was, AF, after Ford, right? So that's how the whole book plays out. And everybody's engineered for a particular group. So, the gammas like to be gammas because they're just, mechanical people. They don't have to think like the deltas. I'm sorry, they don't have to think like the betas and the alphas. So everybody's stratified, which is going to give you an insight, not because this is some prophecy, but it's going to be an insight on where we might go with prejudice in the future. Once we figure out DNA and we're more interested in, like, you guys seen the news that they just came up with a genetically engineered child, apparently. Did you see that in the news? Yeah. I think a Chinese doctor did it. Is that, am I right on that? Well, yeah, because they have no idea. Now, he goes in there, and now he's claiming that this has not been peer reviewed, so we don't know exactly what happened, but genetically engineered. So somebody's saying, well, okay, that's good though in one way, right? Could we genetically engineer embryos so that they would not have Down syndrome? Could we do it because we want to have this? Well, everybody's saying there's no, science has never been able to restrict itself. We're going to start to look at people in terms of their heights, their builds, their physical prowess, and their intellectual abilities. Because if you're going to go through the process to have a genetically engineered child, you want the best. Nobody's going to say, well, I'll just take a child, whatever you have. I mean, it's like the reason why we have to fight so hard to get people to go to the pounds to get rescue dogs, because they'd rather have a breed, right? Now, I'm not making a comparison, but the reality is so in the future, maybe we'll be stratified along that because of genetic engineering. And then think what will happen to dating. Will you date outside of, I mean, if you've been some perfected genetic engineered person, would you accept somebody from a lower genetic past? Maybe not. So maybe this idea of us falling in love romantically with somebody won't be the initial reaction in 150 years from now. Now, if that all sounds like science fiction for you, it is. I mean, but the fact that this particular scientist has claimed this, it means something. Anyway, okay, so back to this. So the only way for their economy in Brave New World to keep going is to more and more and more and more. You have to consume, you have to consume, you have to consume. We're in that now. As a matter of fact, that's another slogan they have. Ending is better than mending. Throw it away. Why would you want something old? Get new. That way it keeps the whole economy going. Okay, how does it fit into this? All right, so what happens is, if the story, and if you read it, fine. If not, I don't mind giving this part away, is that one of the guys doesn't like the system. So he's falling in love with Lenora. He likes her. And his friends are even saying, you're having way too much sex with her. They're going to come after you because they're going to say, what is going on? They're going to get reconditioned, right? So he hears of there's these reservations. Now, I know this is politically incorrect, but this is how it is in the book. There's these reservations, and on the reservations live the savages. Now, they're not Indian, American Indian or anything. But, so he takes a helicopter ride out with Lenora, and the helicopter crashes, and the savages come over. And he meets one of these savages, and they want to bring him back to the city, just almost like for a social experiment. But this is almost like, if you guys ever seen Crocodile Dundee, this is like taking a guy out of the woods in Australia and bringing him into Manhattan. Nothing fits. But they can't understand this guy, and this guy can't understand. Everything is so controlled, they no longer have emotions. They're all built on a scientifically, emotionally controlled society, and every so often, once a month, they put stuff into the food so everybody can have almost like a rabid experience, But you won't have to worry about all the messiness that might come with, being hysterical and everything. You simply have the experience so it satisfies you. And he's like, you guys lost something. You've missed something. And this is what I didn't print it out, so let me get it off my phone. He's talking to the controller. The controller is like the guy in charge. And they've done away with all art and literature and beauty. That's part of my point here. They've done away with it. What purpose does it have in the scientific community? So the controller, the savage says to the controller, because the controller keeps saying, why are you fighting us? What we're giving you is everything that will satisfy the human person. And the savage says, no, I don't want comfort. I want God, I want poetry, I want real danger. I want freedom, I want goodness, I want sin. Mustafa Aman says, so you're claiming the right to be unhappy? He says, yes, all right then, I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. Not to mention, I want the right to grow old, I want the right to grow ugly, I want to be impotent, I want the right to have syphilis and cancer, the right to have too little to eat, the right to be lousy, the right to be in constant apprehension of what may happen tomorrow, the right to catch typhoid, the right to be tortured, to unspeakable pains of every kind. And he says, I claim them all. I mean, it's funny, right? So he's talking about these elements that the intellect and the instincts alone can't have. So I think it's kind of interesting. This then comes from Fyodor Dostoevsky, which is where the whole thing, Beauty Will Save the World, comes from. Although that comes from the book The Idiot. I'll talk about that on Monday. This is from another book that he had written, The Possessed. So he's making the same claim. He says, Shakespeare and Raphael, they're more precious than the emancipation of the serfs. They're more precious than nationalism, more precious than socialism, more precious than the young generation. They're more precious than chemistry, more precious than almost all humanity because they are the fruit. The real fruit of humanity, perhaps the highest fruit that can be. Let me tell you, without English, life is still possible. Without Germany, life is still possible. Without the Russians, it's only two possible. Without science, without bread, life is still possible. Only without beauty is it impossible. For after that, there's nothing left in the world. Now, that's an interesting statement, right? And there's been a lot of intellectuals over the years. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, one of them, that said, I think he went way over on that, and I don't quite understand it. And then eventually he got it. And he even said, he goes, I now get it and I now understand it. He says, and he's dead right on. So my only goal here today was to show you the objectivity and subjectivity of beauty.
and to say it's not all subjective. But that's kind of a new understanding and a new thing in our culture. And we're not claiming that it's entirely objective, that it's something just in the intellect. So there's a subjective aspect to the objectivity, and there's an objective aspect to its subjectivity. But both those things are okay. We can't fall into a paradigm where it's simply what I know and what I could reason out or empirically prove. If we're going to put those limits on the things that are necessary for our world, then at the end of your life, those are none of the things that you're probably going to be trying to hold on to. They're none of those sublime, saturated moments that are going to move us. So I can't tell you by looking at those 3 photos I put up there exactly what you may know from those, but I can tell you you know something, right? What do you think? Questions? Comments?